Back in what many people consider to be the good old days of motorsports in the 1960s and 70s, the cars were certainly quick and the drivers were definitely brave because the sport was far from safe. In fact, there was nearly a 1 in 4 chance back then that even a top driver could expect to die in a racing car accident. Driver safety was not exactly a priority.
Certainly in my first Grand Prix year in 1968 for the Cooper Car Company, I was one of only half the drivers in the Grand Prix that wore seat belts at all. I mean, half the drivers would rather risk being thrown out or having the ability to quickly jump out than to be trapped in the car and risk catching fire.
Looking at some of those cars, you would want to get out of them, in any way you couldn't jump out. But let's not forget the tracks. You look at Spa or the Nürburgring and you see the trees right there and you think, I know a lot of these guys, Brian, Jackie, Sterling Moss, all these great drivers that are my heroes, and I look at them and think, yeah, you're slightly insane. What they used to do was mad.
I was in 6 fires in a 4-year period, from 68 to 72. The bloody cars caught fire all the time. I mean, you'd be driving along in a race or in practice, and you bum, 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 and you look around, the engine's on fire. At the Nürburgring in 1970, I had a new Chevron, and it was a great car. It was a Spider, come over a jump, in top gear at about 130 miles an hour. And when I go back on the power, bub, 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 it's misfiring. So boom, switch on the electric pump, boom, the whole thing blew up pretty well. So I drove it to the nearest marshal's point, the corner workers point, and it was about half a mile away, and I got there, and by this time it's really blazing, and I jumped out of the car, and as I jumped out of the car, the marshal ran away up the road the other way. But fortunately, he left the fire extinguisher, so we managed to get it out. And then in 1971, on the Targa Florio, I had steering failure, and the Porsche 908-3 hit a concrete post right in the fuel tank, and it exploded. And I was soaked in fuel, burning from head to foot, and nobody there. It was 45 minutes before any medical attention came.
It was a different time back then, though, as well. I think a lot of the guys had come off, certainly in the 50s, come off the Second World War, so there was a bit of a different attitude as well. And I think it's become less acceptable, those kind of odds, which is a good thing.
We didn't really know any better about safety things. Of course, everybody was concerned about it. And going back before my time, which is going back a really long way, the drivers then, of course, knew the dangers, but it's the way it was. I mean, if you didn't want to accept those dangers, you didn't drive. It was as simple as that.
I don't know if I would have. I mean, you probably is the answer to that. At the time, at any point in racing, that was all they knew. That was it. The cars were as safe as they could be. The tracks were, I was going to say the tracks were as safe as they could be, but that's probably not true. But yeah, I probably would have done that.
Well, racing is a balancing act, and you're always trying to be on that very edge of the balance between disaster and safety. And sometimes you go over that edge and you hope that your natural skills and reactions will stop you having a disaster. I mean, that's partially what it's all about. It is.
To give you a better example, at Daytona a couple of years ago, right before the 24 hours, I drove a 917K. Brian and I were parked in the banking at Daytona next to each other, and he was in the CSL BMW. And he leaned over, got my mechanic to come over, leaned over, had a word. The mechanic comes, pops the door up, leans in and says, Brian says to tell you that quite a few of these snapped in half at the fuel cell bulkhead in period, so have a good time. I'm driving around the bank and I'm sitting about 155, 160, feeling very nervous. And my feet are beyond the front wheels. The back of the front wheel is right here. I'm looking at the roll cage, which is the size of the small tubes on a bicycle frame, thinking, bloody hell. And was very nervous. 2 hours later, the start of the 24-hour race, we're doing 200 miles an hour in the Daytona prototype, not even thinking about it. And it just shows you how technology has moved on and how it relaxes your mind to know you have that safety.
But achieving that safety was not easy. In the end, it took a world champion driver, Jackie Stewart, to step up and champion the cause of safety.
Well, there's no question that Jackie Stewart was very foremost in promoting driver safety. And that came about partially because he'd had a bad accident at Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium, in the Belgian Grand Prix, the fastest, most difficult racetrack in the world at that time, where he'd been trapped partially upside down with the petrol fuel running all over him, and he couldn't get out because the steering wheel in those days didn't come off. And that's partially why the detachable steering wheel came about, but it really got Jackie going. Plus, of course, all the drivers who were being killed, friends of his and friends of mine at that time. And so he was very, very forceful about it, and he had the power as Formula One world champion and eventually 3 times Formula One world champion to do that. Nobody else really did it.
Jackie did. He made a huge difference, and in a lot of ways he got castigated for it, and a lot of people haven't forgiven him for that, I think. It would have been easy for him just to take, okay, 3 world championships, thank you, I'm just going to focus on driving my car, I'm going to go home, thank you very much. He didn't do that, and he fought for safety, and every single driver that drives now owes guys like Jackie, especially Jackie, but guys like Jackie, a debt of gratitude for what they did.
What they did was launch an international safety initiative led by the founding fellows of the FIA Institute for Motorsport Safety, including Professor Sid Watkins of Great Britain and American doctor Steve Olvey.
Sid Watkins' medical program was a result of what Jackie brought up in Formula One, and that was almost the same year that I started the program in USAC, the medical program, because of what Wally Dallenbach brought up. And that allowed us in both groups really to meet a few years later, because we were all on the similar path. But it allowed research to start, seeing what really caused injuries. I know Dr. Trammell and I did the first study to really see what the accidents were and what kind of injuries they caused. Nobody really knew. And we tabulated over a 5-year period and published that, and showed it to the engineers, and things began to happen that would eliminate, we knew what was causing the injuries, and we began working on things to eliminate those injuries.
One key development was the idea of a driver safety cell, which allowed a driver to ride out a crash rather than having to jump from the car.
That was certainly one of the big breakthroughs, I think, was the safety cell, and the safety cell has become better as time has gone on. And then to complement that, you've got the seats now. Rather than having a carbon shell of a seat or whatever, now the seats are actually like beach seats. So when you have an impact, there's give in that seat too, especially on the ovals and stuff like that. With some of the massive impacts you have, that allows some give and deflects some of those incredible forces. Seat belts obviously have become better. Hands device for frontal impacts to avoid the basial skull fractures. The collar, the surround on the car, when you have those huge impacts as well, whether it's a road course or an oval, you've got something that takes some of the force as well. The helmets have improved, in the case of fire, the suits, all that has improved massively.
In 2007, Dario conducted his own real-world test of those safety improvements twice at over 200 miles per hour.
Both those impacts, they happen within 6 days of each other. The first one, we were doing about 210 miles an hour when the car took off in the first accident. It was about 25, 30 feet in the air, did all these rolls, and when it came down actually on top of the number 9 target car over there. Scott and I weren't teammates at the time, but then the roll hoop snapped off and the car dragged along the ground. So, every part of the safety of the car, the helmet, all did its job. Because when the roll hoop broke, the helmet then wore all the way down, but it was still intact. All this, the seat, the surround, the hands device, the roll cage that Lara had built, the safety cell, it all did its job. And then the second one, things like the safer wall, it did its job. I was lucky I caught the top of the safer wall in that second flip.
Today, motor racing can be justifiably proud of its safety record. Fatalities, thankfully, are rare, but there is still more to be done.
I think that the FIA guys have done a great job with helmets, and other parts of safety. I would love to see them get more involved in this fence debate as well. I'd love to see them focus a little bit on oval tracks and a little bit in America. I feel a little bit we're left out a little bit. I'd love to see them get involved, because I think if we fix the fences and make the fences safer, it'll be for all forms of motor racing. So I'd love to see them look into that. That's my opinion. I've got the safer wall. We need to start looking really at those fences now, making those safe. we can't be complacent. We've got to keep pushing it. We have got to keep pushing all the time. As we keep making the cars faster and all this, we've got to continue to make them safer, and the tracks, and for the guys in the pit lane. It's got to be, we've got to keep working on it.